Hi everyone, my name is Erin Stewart. I'm a young adult author and I'm excited to be here today to talk about writing on Artist Chat. I'm going to make this video about some of the questions I get from students and readers about how to become an author and what it's like to be an author. So the first question I often get from people is, how did you get published? How did you become an author? If you know much about publication, the path to getting a book published is very intense, and it's full of rejection, and it's full of hard work and sweat and tears, and it's never usually a straight path. So my path to publication actually started about 8 years ago, when I decided I was going to write a book, and I told my husband, "Hey, I'm going to write a book," and he said, "Do you know how to write a book?" And I said, "No, but how hard could it be? Everyone's writing a book, right?" So it turns out it's really hard. And so I started writing a young adult book. It was a science fiction, which is not what I write now. But it took me 4 years to write that first book. And it took me 4 years because I had to learn how to write. So I went to conferences and I read books on writing, and I read every young adult book I could get my hands on. And I wrote a first book. It took 4 years and it was not very good. I did get an agent for it, which is someone that you need to represent your work, who will then try and sell your work to a publisher. So I did get an agent, and she tried to submit my book and tried to sell my book, and it didn't sell. But while she was trying to submit my book, I started writing another book, which was the book that eventually became my debut novel, which is Scars Like Wings. It came out in October with Random House. So I kept writing during my first kind of failed book, if you will, but I don't consider it failed because I needed to write that book to learn how to write a book, and it was the practice I needed to write what eventually became my debut novel. So my agent at that point then started submitting Scars Like Wings, and sold it really quickly, and the rest is history, and that's how that happened. So a lot of students will ask me, how long did this book take to write? And technically this book took me a year and a half from start to finish to write, and to be done with. But if you really count all the time that went into that first book too, that's 6.5 years, more like 6.5 years total, which is a long time to do something with no guarantee that it's ever going to be anything besides a document on your computer. So if you do go into writing, you've got to go into it because you love writing and because you can't imagine living a life where you're not creating stories and telling stories, because publication is like the icing on the cake, but it's not why I write. It's not why I love writing. I love writing because I love creating, and honestly because I have all these characters and all these stories in my head, and I have to get them out or I'll go nuts. Okay, the second question I get a lot is, do I plot my stories out, or do I outline, or do I just start writing? So a lot of writers kind of put themselves into two different groups, right? There's the first group, which is discovery writing, which is you just sit down and you have kind of a spark of an idea and you just go and you just write and you create your characters as you go. The second form is outliners, plotters, where they know every scene that's going to happen until the end of their book, and they just work their way through those scenes. Most writers, I think, are somewhere in the middle, and I'm a somewhere in the middle, where I have to know a few things that are going to happen, certain plot points along my story, and then I fill those in with discovery writing, but I know where I'm headed. I know what happens at certain parts in the books. If you're new to writing, I've brought one of my books that I would suggest. It's called Save the Cat Writes a Novel. And it is a great book for learning how to plot a novel start to finish. Like, what needs to happen at what point in the book so that you can have a whole novel by the end. Another great book, I don't have it with me, is called The Plot Whisperer. And that's a great book that helps you create your plot, and it's really focused on your character's transformation driving the plot, which is really important because you need things to happen, but you also need a character we care about. And when those two come together, that's when you get a really good story. So I would suggest looking into those. Okay, next question is, what do you do when you get writer's block? So this is a question I get a lot from especially teenage writers, because it's something we all deal with, right? Where we have an idea and it's going great and we're loving it, and then all of a sudden it like fizzles and we can't think of what happens next, and we're like, this is the stupidest idea. Why did I even start this? So I would just like to suggest an alternative way to look at writer's block. Instead of looking at writer's block as a stop in the road, I'd like to think of writer's block as a detour in the road. So if I get to a point in my manuscript or in my story where I'm thinking like, ooh, I cannot figure out what comes next, sometimes that's a sign from my story that I'm going the wrong way. So sometimes if you're having writer's block, it's helpful to sit back and think, okay, what is this writer's block trying to teach me? What is it trying to tell me? And maybe it's trying to tell you that you're going down the wrong way. You're going down the wrong plot thread. Maybe you need to back up to the last point that your story was working and clicking and that you were getting that buzzing, everything's going so great feeling. Maybe back up to that point and then take a different path. Maybe your character makes a different choice or something else happens to your character. Maybe that writer's block is really telling you that you need to take a detour and your story should actually be going in a different direction. So I try and see writer's block not as a stoppage, but as an opportunity to reevaluate where my book is going and maybe take that other path. Let's see, another question I get a lot is, what is next for me in writing? Like I said, my debut book came out in October, and in the past year, while that's been going on marketing and getting published, I've been working on another book, and I've just turned it in a couple weeks ago, and I'm waiting to hear back on that. So fingers crossed that my editor loves it and can help me get it where it needs to be published. It would probably come out fall of 2021. And it's a anxiety, kind of a perfectionism anxiety, which is something I have struggled with my whole life. And I've written her story where she's trying to keep her anxiety a secret, because if you've got anxiety, that's a flaw, and more. So she needs to come to realize that it's not a flaw, it's a feeling, and it's a feeling that a lot of people are dealing with. And the best way to deal with it is to talk about it and get it out, which is something I'm a huge proponent of. So that's the story. And I have to say, writing that second book was a beast. It's really hard writing a book and you're promoting your first book and there's a lot going on, and everything else that's going on in the world right now that's got us all preoccupied. But the thing about writing is you can write anywhere and you can always stories to be told. So the thing I would like to leave with you about writing during this wild time when we're either in quarantine or isolation and you're out of school and what is happening with the world and you're tired of your brothers and sisters and parents, and oh my gosh, if you don't see your friends again, you're going to go insane. I would just suggest, think about the story that you want to tell. Think about all these things are happening in the world right now and you're living them. There's a story in there. What is it you're feeling? What is it you're experiencing? What is happening that you could turn into a story? And take this opportunity of downtime and write about it. You know, you can write about it in a novel format, in poetry format, in Instagram posts. However you want to tell your story, I would really encourage you to look at your life and say, what story can I tell right now that could help the world, that could help other people? Because that's what stories do. They help each other and they connect us. One of the coolest things I've seen during this whole coronavirus is people talking about books and what they're reading, because they actually have time to do that again because there's not much else to do. I mean, there's also like binging Netflix. But stories are what are connecting us. Those stories on Netflix are connecting us. People like to talk about stories. So I hope you guys are staying healthy and staying safe and reading lots of great books. See ya.